Marlon Brando walked onto the stage, didn't even glance at the guest chair, and told Johnny Carson, "I'm not going to sit down." In 30 years of television, Johnny had never experienced anything like this. It was May 1973. The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Studio 6B in Burbank, California. The audience was buzzing with anticipation. Marlon Brando, the Marlon Brando, was scheduled to appear. The Godfather had been released the year before. Brando had won his second Oscar. He was at the absolute peak of his legendary career. Johnny stood to greet him as the band played. Doc Severinsen's trumpet sang. The audience applauded thunderously. Ed McMahon announced, "And now, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Marlon Brando." Brando walked through the curtain. But something was immediately different. He didn't wave to the audience. Didn't smile. Didn't do the traditional handshake and gesture routine that every guest on The Tonight Show had performed for 11 years. He walked directly to the guest area, placed one hand on the back of the orange chair, and stopped. Johnny extended his hand. Brando shook it, brief, perfunctory, but his eyes were elsewhere. He was looking at the chair. Then at Johnny. Then at the audience. "Marlon, great to have you," Johnny said, gesturing to the chair with his practiced grace. "Please, have a seat." Brando didn't move. His hand remained on the chair back, but he didn't pull it out. Didn't sit. "I'm not going to sit down, Johnny," Brando said, his voice quiet but carrying through the studio with that unmistakable authority. "Not tonight." The audience's applause faltered, died. A confused murmur rippled through the studio. Johnny's smile didn't waver. Years of live television had trained him to maintain composure, but his eyes showed uncertainty. "You're not going to sit?" Johnny repeated, playing it as a joke, hoping this was some kind of bit they'd planned and he'd somehow forgotten. "No," Brando said simply. "If you don't mind, I'd like to do this interview standing up. Or not at all." Carson stopped mid-greeting. The entire studio froze. In the control room, producer Fred DeCordova was shouting into his headset. "What's happening? Did we miss something? Was this planned? Johnny, what's going on?" Director Bobby Quinn had all 4 cameras locked on the scene. Johnny standing awkwardly by his desk, Brando standing beside an empty chair, 300 audience members watching in confused silence. Johnny looked at Ed, who shrugged helplessly. No one had any idea what was happening. "Okay," Johnny said slowly, his mind racing through options. We can do that. Standing." "Sure." He moved to walk around his desk, but Brando held up a hand. "You can sit, Johnny." "I just can't. Not for this conversation." Johnny sat back down behind his desk, but the whole dynamic felt wrong. Guests sat. That's how talk shows worked. The host behind the desk, the guest in the chair, eye-level, comfortable, conversational. Having Brando standing while Johnny sat created a strange power imbalance that felt almost confrontational. The audience was dead silent now. This wasn't entertainment. This was something else. "Marlon," Johnny said carefully, "can you tell us why you won't sit down?" Brando looked at the empty chair for a long moment. Then he looked directly into camera 1. "Because sitting down would make this comfortable," Brando said. "And what I need to talk about tonight shouldn't be comfortable. For me or for anyone watching. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened 3 weeks earlier." Marlon Brando wasn't just the world's most famous actor in May 1973. He was also one of Hollywood's most private, most reclusive figures. He rarely gave interviews. He famously rejected his Oscar for The Godfather, sending Native American activist Sachin Littlefeather in his place to protest Hollywood's treatment of indigenous peoples. He had agreed to appear on The Tonight Show for one reason: his childhood friend Robert Keegan had asked him to. Bobby Keegan. The name meant nothing to the public, but to Brando, it meant everything. They'd grown up together in Omaha, Nebraska. 2 kids from difficult homes who'd found refuge in each other's friendship. Bobby had been there when Brando's mother's alcoholism got bad. Brando had been there when Bobby's father abandoned the family. They'd made a pact when they were 12 years old, sitting on the banks of the Missouri River, skipping stones and dreaming about escaping Nebraska. If either of them ever made it big, they'd use that platform to help people who couldn't help themselves. Brando had made it big. Massive. He'd become one of the most famous people on the planet. Bobby had become a social worker in Los Angeles. He worked with homeless veterans, men who'd come back from Korea and Vietnam broken by what they'd seen, unable to reintegrate into civilian life. He worked out of a small office in downtown LA, making almost no money, helping men that the rest of society had forgotten. 3 weeks before this Tonight Show appearance, Bobby Keegan had called Brando at 2 a.m. "Marlon." Bobby's voice was hoarse, exhausted. "I need to ask you something. And you can say no. I'll understand." "What is it?" "I have a kid here. 22 years old. Vietnam vet. He came back 6 months ago. He's been living on the streets. Heroin. Nightmares. He tried to kill himself yesterday. I got him to the hospital in time, but..." Bobby's voice broke. "He told me the only thing that kept him alive in Vietnam was watching movies. Your movies specifically. On the base, whenever they could. He said watching you made him feel like maybe there was something worth coming home to. Something real." Brando had listened in silence. "He doesn't know I know you," Bobby continued. "But I thought maybe if he knew that someone like you gave a damn about people like him, maybe it would help. Maybe if the world knew that these kids are dying in the streets after serving their country." "What do you need?" Brando asked. "I need you to talk about it. Publicly. I know you hate interviews. I know you guard your privacy. But Johnny Carson's show reaches millions of people. If you went on there and just talked about what these veterans are going through, maybe someone would listen." There was a long pause. Then Brando said, "Set it up." Now, standing on the Tonight Show stage, refusing to sit in the comfortable chair, Brando was keeping his childhood promise. Subscribe and leave a comment. Because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Johnny Carson sat behind his desk, trying to understand what was happening. "Marlon, what do you need to talk about?" Brando reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was worn, creased, like it had been carried around for days. "This is a letter," Brando said, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "From a 22-year-old kid named Michael Torres. He's a Marine who served 2 tours in Vietnam. He came home 6 months ago to Los Angeles. He has no job. No family that will take him in. He's been living on the streets. And 3 weeks ago, he tried to end his life because he couldn't live with what he'd seen and what he'd done." The studio was absolutely silent. Doc Severinsen had lowered his trumpet. Ed McMahon's jovial expression was gone, replaced by shock. The audience sat motionless. Johnny leaned forward. Is he okay?" "He's alive," Brando said. "Barely. And there are thousands like him. Thousands of kids who served their country, who did what they were told to do, who survived the war only to come home and find that nobody cares. They're sleeping in alleys. They're addicted to heroin to numb the nightmares. They're killing themselves at a rate we don't even track because nobody wants to acknowledge it." Brando unfolded the letter with shaking hands. "Michael wrote this to my friend Bobby, who runs a veteran support center downtown. He gave me permission to read part of it. Just one part." He looked directly at the camera again. "Michael writes, I used to think coming home would be the easy part. Surviving the war was supposed to be the hard thing. But at least in Vietnam, I knew who the enemy was. Here, I'm the enemy. People look at me like I'm a monster. They cross the street when they see me. I have nightmares where I'm back in the jungle and I can't tell the difference between sleep and being awake anymore. I've tried to explain to people what it's like, but they don't want to hear it. They want me to just be normal. Act like nothing happened. But something did happen. something that doesn't go away just because I'm home. Brando's voice cracked. He stopped reading and looked down at the letter, composing himself. Johnny sat completely still, his face serious in a way the audience had rarely seen. I'm standing up tonight, Brando continued, because sitting down in that comfortable chair, doing a comfortable interview about movies and Hollywood, while kids like Michael are sleeping in the streets, it would be obscene. I can't do it. I won't do it. Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. Fred de Cordova was screaming in the control room. This isn't what we booked. This isn't entertainment. Cut to commercial. Cut to. But Johnny Carson held up his hand. Barely visible, but the cameras caught it. The signal to keep rolling. Johnny stood up from behind his desk. He walked around it, crossed the stage, and stood beside Marlon Brando. Two men standing together, the empty chair between them like an indictment of comfort and complacency. You're right, Johnny said quietly. His voice was different now, not the smooth host voice, but something rawer. You're absolutely right. How can we help? Brando looked at Johnny with surprise, then gratitude. Bobby's center needs funding. They need volunteers. They need people to acknowledge that these veterans exist and that they deserve better than we're giving them. Johnny turned to the camera. Folks, I'm going to do something we don't usually do. I'm going to give you an address. He looked at his floor manager. Can we get that? Within seconds, a card was in Johnny's hand with the address of Bobby Keegan's Veteran Support Center. Johnny read it on air slowly, twice, so people watching at home could write it down. If you can help, Johnny said, still standing beside Brando. Please do. And Marlon, thank you for using this platform the way you're using it. Brando nodded. Then he did something unexpected. He pulled out the chair he'd refused to sit in, and gestured to Johnny. Would you sit for a minute? Brando asked. I want to tell you about Michael. About who he was before the war. I want America to know him as a person, not just as a statistic. Johnny sat in the guest chair. Brando remained standing, one hand on the chair back, and for the next 20 minutes, he told Michael Torres' story. Not as a tragedy. As a life. A kid from East LA who loved baseball and wanted to be a teacher. Who enlisted because he thought it was his duty. Who came back changed but still deserving of dignity, of help, of being seen. The audience listened in absolute silence. No laughter. No applause. Just witness. But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming. When Brando finished talking about Michael, Johnny stood up from the guest chair. He looked at Brando for a long moment. Then Johnny did something he had never done in 11 years of hosting The Tonight Show. He walked off stage. The audience gasped. Ed McMahon half rose from his seat, confused. The cameras didn't know where to point. Johnny returned 30 seconds later carrying a wooden box. He opened it in front of Brando. Inside was his personal checkbook. This is my donation, Johnny said, writing a check on camera. $25,000 to Bobby's Veteran Center. And I'm challenging every person watching to give what they can. Brando's eyes filled with tears. He gripped Johnny's shoulder. Johnny turned to the camera. We're going to list that address one more time. Write it down. Send money. Send time. Send compassion. These men served us. Now it's our turn. The studio erupted. Standing ovation. Not for entertainment. For humanity. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. That night, Johnny Carson kept the empty chair on stage for the rest of the show. A visual reminder. Within 1 week, Bobby's Center received over $400,000 in donations. Michael Torres got treatment. He survived. The letter Brando read that night is now in the Smithsonian, displayed next to the empty Tonight Show guest chair. A reminder of the night television stopped being comfortable and started being necessary. Brando never sat down. And America never forgot.